The #1 problem facing every automaker and supplier is recruiting the talent they need. Baby boomers are retiring by the thousands, and the auto industry is struggling to replace them. On this week's show, we dive into how automakers can attract new talent. And now, here's your host, John McElroy.
I want to thank you all for joining us on Autoline this week. You know, everywhere I go in the automotive industry, the #1 complaint I hear from car companies and all their suppliers is they cannot get the talent that they need. There literally is a crisis in recruitment in the automotive industry right now, and that is what today's show is all about. Joining me to discuss this issue are Brad Holden from Holden Richardson, a headhunting firm, if I can call it that.
You may.
Okay, very good. And Jessica Robinson with the Michigan Mobility Institute. I'll bet most people haven't heard of it. What is it, Jessica?
Not yet. We're brand new. So we are a talent organization focused on defining the curriculum that professionals in the mobility industry will need for the future.
Okay, perfect, because even though we've got problems today getting talent, we're going to have even more as we move forward. But Brad, what is it about what I just said? I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
Every company I visit, when I ask, what's the biggest issue facing you? They say, we can't get the people we need.
And it's at all levels. You know, it is executive recruitment. We're busy. We're as busy as we've ever been, and the demand coming into this year is unabated. It's just the demand for senior level talent. But then when you sit down with the senior level talent or the senior HR people, they're looking at you for any other solution. What can you do for us at the the high pots, the up and coming, the next level executive, as well as it filters down to the factory floor. People, you just can't find people to work.
Jessica, I'm sure you've run into this issue as well.
We have, and it's actually part of why we decided to set up the Institute. I came from the mobility services business and saw it myself with my own eyes. And so last year we announced that we were going to start down this path and try and understand what the need for mobility talent was. We actually spent some time doing some research with BCG and really validated exactly what Brad said. In the next 10 years, we believe that there'll actually be a need for 100,000 new professional level workers in mobility in the next 10 years. So this is a problem now, and it's continuing to grow. And that's not even at the skilled trades or on the factory floor.
And we'll get into that too, but let's talk technical talent. Is it because technology is changing that there's a shortage? Are there not enough students graduating with the technical skills? What is it?
Well, I think, are you talking about technical in terms of the educational, like engineering background? Or technical?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the demand for it, certainly as the electronics industry has continued to explode, the software industry has exploded, the demand for it has pulled, just increased beyond what the schools are producing. The compensation levels in that have created a war within that level for this talent. And, and it is the #1. You sit down with CEOs and they'll tell you, I'm not worried about my management team. I'm not losing an ounce of sleep over that. It's the 50 recs I have open in engineering. And, if you can't get engineering talent, you're not going to get the product out the door. I mean, it's frightening, actually, for a lot of these CEOs.
Yeah, and that's what we've heard, too, is they can't fill the open recs today because, in part, the background.
Well, hold on. What's a rec?
Oh, a rec.
Well,
you're the HR guy, requisition.
No, just the open spot. I mean, a person will go, like the engineering manager will go to HR and say, hey, look, we've had people leaving, retiring, they've been going to other employers, so they're open jobs, and so that means HR's authorized it, the leadership is authorized spending money and filling those.
So is that short for requisition?
Yeah, exactly.
I've not heard that.
It's literally the open seat where the company has done the justification to say we need to hire this person, and they can't because there's not enough of them, or they may not have the talent base with the right set of skills. And so one of the things we're seeing in engineering is so much of our training today is focused on one discipline, maybe electrical. But the jobs that are being filled now require skills in that, but also computer programming, also robotics, but also the ability to combine knowledge in all of those disciplines together. And that is not something we've historically groomed inside companies in the auto industry, and that's typically not the way it's taught in a university.
Is it Have the universities not caught on to this? Don't they see opportunity with channeling students into the disciplines that would get them jobs?
So they do, and we are seeing a recognition there. It goes back to they just can't do it fast enough, thing one. But thing two is really that connection to industry to understand what those skills might be. And there's something else that's happening, particularly here in Michigan, and it's the perception of this industry as a great place to start your career. And so we're also seeing many students, let's say, that have done a traditional computer science degree, they don't think of coming to our companies. They're going to the tech companies on the coasts because they don't fully understand the potential for their career. So one of the things we're also excited about is shifting the mindset about the benefits of taking a job within mobility.
Is that changing because of, electrification, autonomous cars, and all? I mean, the industry's kind of getting sexy again.
It is. I mean, one of the things that I think is also really cool about it is we're starting to see people come from different backgrounds. So I was sharing, I studied anthropology. Very few of us in the social sciences.
I love this. Anthropology
led to marketing, but it led to marketing. It's perfect.
That's right. Yeah. Within engineering, but also those technology leaders that are on the front lines, they're bringing a different approach. So one of the things we're doing at the Institute is actually creating our advisory board. One of the women that's joining, Dr. Anita Samgupta, she was the head, she was EVP of engineering at Hyperloop. But before that, she worked at NASA, and she designed the landing system for the Curiosity rover. She's now working with an eVTOL company here in Detroit. So she has a completely different perspective on what mobility means in the future than maybe people who have been around this industry before.
Yeah, no kidding. Her idea of mobility goes all the way to Mars.
To Mars and back, right?
Brad, what is it, though, about corporate America? Because if you went back to, say, the 50s, the 60s, maybe even into the 70s, corporate America would hire the best and the brightest, and they just train them. Yeah. Now it seems to me they expect students to be handed to them on a platter that have got all the right skills.
Well, I think, again, going back to the competition for these skill sets, whether electronic manufacturing, or electrical engineering, manufacturing engineering, software engineering, the opportunities to work on stuff that's so much more sexy, and so much, the SpaceX and organizations like that have really siphoned off a lot of the talent. That's what the traditional car industry is competing against, and I think that's and it's not, it's in Detroit versus Silicon Valley versus Seattle. There's just a whole lot more out there that for this generation is much more appealing and sexy.
You said earlier that you have clients who say, I'm not worried about my management team, it's the technical team, but it seems to me you're running into issues trying to recruit top talent like you do, executive talent.
Well, again, they have the same. We did a search for one of the major OEs, and it was in their propulsion group. And at the end of the day, they wanted someone very senior who knew how to develop software. But they didn't want an automotive person. They wanted someone to bring a different skill set, different perspective to it.
So this was an automotive company that did not want an automotive person.
Correct. They said we know how to design and apply, the technology to our products. We want someone to come in who's got a completely different thought process on how software is developed and how it's applied as a solution.
Mm-hmm. How open is the tech world to coming to automotive?
Well, that's a challenge. Again, in part because of location. A lot of this research is in Austin, Texas. It's in Phoenix. It's in Silicon Valley. So, Detroit, when it's 50 below zero, it does become tough to compete with.
Yeah, and I would say, I experienced a bit of that in my own personal journey, not coming from auto as traditionally defined. And for me, Detroit was unexpected, but a place where I could have a great quality of life and be part of multiple business units that were thinking about doing things differently. And one of the things that we're also seeing is people that have a connection to Michigan or this industry and maybe have left are considering coming back or doing it in a different way. Because when you think about it, and of course, I'm assuming we're all biased at this table, when you think about the scale and the scope and reach that you have when doing work within some of these traditional companies. You can't get that in a startup. And so for those that understand that and maybe are a little further in their careers, they might actually be drawn to that. And then, you know, I always believe if someone comes here and they see what we have to offer in Michigan, the business community, quality of life, I mean, then I'm willing to believe that we can still hook them. Yeah.
Well, I remember during the recession, Business Week was doing a story on talent mobility, not mobility. And the reporter called and said, with the recession, why aren't people leaving? Because they love it here. The quality of life is, you've got great universities, you've got, great business climate, business center, you've got technology. And now downtown Detroit is hot. I mean, I think people are looking at Detroit as a potential destination going forward. It's just that there's a lot of competition.
There is, and we who live here in the Detroit area, in Michigan, are so focused on that. But I got to tell you, I hear the same problem in recruitment with European companies, with Japanese companies. So it's not just a Detroit issue. It's the way that the traditional auto industry has been looked at, I think. But I do see that starting to change as we get into electrification and autonomy and mobility and the like. As I said earlier, the industry's starting to get sexy again, but not everyone has caught on to that yet.
No, and it's funny, the Detroit piece, because it's something at the Institute we're actually pretty firmly committed to, is that there will be a new center for education in the city of Detroit. And when you talk to startups who are looking at the best place to build their business, they recognize they should come here because they can have the OEs and the tier 1 suppliers as first customers. So many times they are opening those first offices. So we're starting to see that great flow of new business and new talent coming into the industry. But then so many times they've said, oh, but I still need to open a dev office in San Francisco or New York. So we're hoping that we can actually grow this talent locally, attract the best and brightest from around the world, but also train Detroiters and people from Michigan, so that we're actually starting to fill that funnel with people that are already here.
Do you see a change with a younger generation? Are millennials more interested in getting into the auto industry now, both at an executive level and at a mobility level?
I mean, from what I've seen in my own eyes, the answer is yes, if they can see the path, if they can understand how the classes that they've taken in elementary and high school in robotics and math start to connect in. And then they also need to see, I think, leaders who look like them and come from different backgrounds. And so if we can do that, I have to believe that they'll want to come into the industry. And then the other thing that I saw in building some of my own teams is a connection to purpose is so important now. And I think, again, I'm biased, but mobility it underpins so many other things that whether you're a traditional engineer or someone with a background like myself, mobility is an enabler to many other things in life. And so for those that are connected to purpose, this industry is a great place for them too.
Well, and I think that's where electrification is coming in. It's environmentally, it's environmentally positive, and people feel good about, looking at the new propulsion technology, whether it's, again, and it could be, and it involves all sorts, I mean, it's a hardware, so there's certainly mechanical engineering, then there's thermal engineering, then there's power and power management and storage, and there's all the controls aspect to it, and so, it really is attracting, the millennial, but by the same token, it's all of that's also creating this competition we're talking about.
What about this gig economy, too? We've been talking about people coming out of school with the skills. You're able to recruit executives. We're talking at a fairly high level, but increasingly, people don't go to work for a company for the rest of their lives. I mean, that's almost unheard of these days. It's more the gig economy. Do we need to make changes to sort of grease the skids to make it easier for people to move from job to job, company to company?
That's a great question.
Yeah, well, there's in the new technology companies, one of the challenges is a job generally comes with a non-compete because the technology is so, it's protected, and so it does prevent people from just hopping around. and it does tend to lock people in unless they leave and go back into a more traditional, traditional kind of role.
Oh, interesting. So if you're in a high-tech area, you might get locked into staying at a company?
Absolutely. Well, yeah.
The other thing we're seeing as potential need for is some sort of validation or certification of a skill set. And traditionally it's been a degree, but we can see a world within mobility that there are types of jobs that maybe fall within the gig economy that can be swapped. So maybe you work on a fleet for one company or a fleet for another, but there's a standard where it's independent and kind of third-party defined to say you can do X, Y, and Z, maybe like a tradesperson in the past or even today. And the Institute, the work that we'll do might actually start to define that. So you might go and get your autonomous vehicle fleet manager certificate, like your health certificate when you work in the restaurant industry, right? And then you can take that place to place, and it's recognized that you've done the base level of work.
So is that what you're working on, too? Or one of the things that you're working on is identifying what possible kind of jobs and skills and hence degrees or certification is needed?
We are. And one of the things that's fascinating is, I imagine it's also, you've seen this too, is sometimes the jobs that we post for in the industry aren't exactly what we're looking for, but we're trying to find the language and the reference points to our existing structure for what that new person should be like. So one is really digging in with our advisory board technology leaders to say, here are the pieces of knowledge that someone needs. And then also trying to say, well, how does one acquire them? And then start to build the curriculum around that. And so we're working on that at the professional level for those that might be reskilling or upskilling. At the executive level, folks that have led an automotive supplier or an OE in the past that may not have been focused on mobility. What does he or she need to learn? And then the skilled trades piece as well. So we're looking across those. And then the last piece for us is we actually believe there's a need for a new type of master's degree. So it goes back to what types of certifications do you need, and what might it mean to have a master of mobility in the future? So, yeah, we have big aspirations here, but it's all driven by what the industry needs, and I think that's different.
And are universities open to doing this?
Yes, so far.
I know you're just getting going.
Yeah,
but
we have heard absolutely. And that's one of the things I and then my business partner as well know from our past experience is how to kind of navigate within the industry to do new frameworks and new models. I worked on setting up corporate accelerators in the past, which again is a very different beast inside a Fortune 50 company. So we know we can bring industry to the table. There's a screaming need. And we've gotten lots of interest from universities, whether here in Michigan or internationally. So no shortage of interest right now. It's about figuring the right set of pieces to pull together.
What do you think, Brad? In the future, are you going to have one of your clients say, Bradley, go out and get me a master of mobility?
Could very well. Could very well. But, another opportunity for the gig economy and for people who that we see growing too is the staffing companies and, the engineering firms, because it'll challenge the millennials. I mean, they get to work on a variety of different projects for a variety of different employers on a variety of different technologies. So it satisfies that, that need.
Is that a growing business?
Oh my God, yeah. Temporary employment is the solution, or temporary staffing is a big market right now.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. What about, we talked about it ever so briefly. What about blue collar? What about skilled trades, especially? Because again, in the automotive industry, and this is true of manufacturing in the United States, we're literally at a critical shortage, almost a crisis, really, of skilled trades people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a shortage today. I mean, again, here in Michigan, we are tracking shortages in construction, but this goes across that employment level. And in the automotive industry, we talk many times about the disruption to driving jobs as well, and the number of folks that potentially will lose those careers because we won't need drivers anymore. But at the same time, kind of going back to this idea of a certificate, there will be new jobs created to run those fleets and support those systems. So there's a company here that had to basically invent a new title, which is a field autonomous engineer. You've never recruited for one.
No, I haven't.
Went to school to find one, but it's because it's this hybrid. And in this case, that person has a 4-year degree, but honestly, they may not need to in the future. And so, yes, there will be disruption, but we think that there will be equally interesting, if not better paying jobs in the future to run these fleets. And so the work that we did, again, with BCG suggests between 65 and 75,000 new workers in the next decade just in this skilled trades level.
Man.
Yeah. But the manufacturing's in crisis. I mean, we're probably doing, if I told right now, the level of demand for manufacturing talent, both at the senior level and then at the floor level, but it's interesting. There's a lot of retirement. There's a lot of companies looking at replacing the people that they have in place. The demands on, certainly in the auto sector of continually improving are there, and with certainly one of the issues is tariffs and how it's eaten and eroded everyone's profitability. And so they're looking for ways to gain some of that back, and it can be through manufacturing and plant floor operations, operational improvement. And that, but the hourly worker, it's very tough, and companies are having to be extremely creative in finding solutions and people.
How do we get that turned around, Brad, especially at a managerial level? I've never met anybody going into college who says, I'm going into manufacturing. I've never met one. Now, some of them come out with manufacturing because they sort of stumble into it.
Right.
I've never met anybody who says, I'm going to college to learn manufacturing.
Well, I have.
Okay, well, you're into it more than I am. But how do you turn that around?
Well, I think through internships. I mean, I think that a lot of these manufacturing people are in fact degreed engineers, and most of them are mechanical engineers. Not surprisingly, they grew up working with their hands. They liked fixing the lawnmower or the snowblower, and so that attracted them to manufacturing engineering or to mechanical engineering, and those are the people you want to ideally put on the line in frontline supervisory roles, either as an intern or as a co-op student in the programs. I mean, I think that's the best way to do it. Yeah. But it's, you're right. I mean, but manufacturing today too requires a different skill level than manufacturing used to. Today, whether it's discrete manufacturing or process manufacturing, the control systems that are managing the workflow, the material flow, the quality measurements, all of that it really requires a high degree of educational background and professionalism.
Jessica, your thoughts on that? And would the Michigan Mobility Institute, look at what can we do for blue-collar jobs and skilled trade in particular? Yeah,
so skilled trade out in the fields for sure as these systems are deployed. And I think the question you raise inside the plant is an interesting one. I mean, we've already seen such a change in the technologies that are used. I think where the Institute will probably have the most direct role immediately is potentially helping those managers see what they should be hiring for, and potentially even coaching those managers through change as well as they bring more robotics into the line. There's this idea of co-botting, which is how do you work alongside a robot? What does it mean for someone on the line to do that? We think we can play a role, but we're as focused on creating the education now for those people as they may transition into different work.
Mm-hmm. The good news in all this is what you guys are saying is lots of jobs are going to be open. Yeah. And again, is maybe part of the challenge for the automotive industry or manufacturing in general is selling that. Any ideas on, and maybe your institute is perfectly positioned to do that, selling the idea that this is a great place to pursue a career.
Yeah, well, and anyone who knows me personally knows how much of a champion I am for this work. The state is making tremendous investments in helping people see what a great industry this is to come into. But I think the other piece is it's shifting the narrative that this is not bending metal as we're known for in the region. This is about working with world-class technology And the reality is, if we don't collectively figure this out, there's at least a 6x gap in the people we're going to need in the future and where we have now. So we have to. We all have to get on board with this story that this is it's a great place to be and really important work and quite challenging. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this too in your recruiting. Yeah. As people start to understand what the work is, it's much more intellectually stimulating than I think you would assume from the outside in.
And Brad, you must see opportunity too, because boomers are retiring by the dozens.
Yeah, well, that's what there's a lot of retirement at this stage. You know, things are good right now. Everyone's portfolio looks pretty good at this stage, and people are retiring. There's a lot of vacancies because of retirement.
That's got to be good for your business.
It is. It's terrific. Yeah, it really is. But it creates. But by the same token, there's a lot of competition for these people. If someone raised their hand and said, "Well, yeah, I'm interested in that role," that means they've done that to 4 other people as well. I mean, they're looking at a variety of different opportunities, and they can choose. I mean, they really can.
What's the biggest competition to the auto industry then? The tech industry?
Well, I think in the traditional tech jobs, the answer is yes. I think that's, as we've discussed, the new technologies are, and it could also be in the tech industry as it relates to computer technology. It's the Dells and Microsoft's. Demand's enormous.
Yeah.
Well, very interesting discussion. Lots of jobs out there if you get the right training. But I want to thank you both for this discussion. Brad Holden from Holden Richardson.
Thank you.
And Jessica Robinson from the Michigan Mobility Institute.
Thanks, John.
Thanks. Thanks for having us.